So what did they show me Sheila Padavar? Does that mean what? They first yeah, part or?
No, the morning is when it's bad, and the night is when it's good. The night is when it's
When's the link was that? Right? When did they have it right away?
right. So we said the first one, we said that when it's at night, it's too late.
If a button pops up here that says publish, just press it, okay?
It should pop, meaning supposed to pop?
Trouble starts at night.
The nighttime started the next day. Early time. As far as these no nation that is there that Hashem does.
Their God.
Their God is not here. Hashem are before God.
Hey.
The Asif. If someone else no one can God and try it, you should make with my sheets,
even though we said there's one to the world, but if you're doing the world because it's Baruch, there's nothing to
talking about I mean the don't go their way. But also light in going to if you go the way digital options because of foreign exchange, you don't do ethics properly. The Alzheimer on the website, which is the optimum, help them. The Al-Motion, the Al-Shnei asking now, the Mintas, and on two brothers that are killed they're killed
their blood was still there.
Okay, when you feel Arga was orange, or Ira was orange, how the ship, what would you say something? Move out. I'll wait. Can't start. I'll close big. They are forged that and coming out.
He didn't move in then. That's so. It's really easy. Again. Yeah.
The delay giving the documents that the loan was paid. You paid them and you go back to the receipt and now you say you got to pay them. You paid them. Something.
They have them tower in their hand, and they don't make one call.
The property of Malabat that they go to get when it gets ready. You don't pay them. You delay payment.
What is your rational But if they are spread out, the rules that say spread out, it's kosher. If you do all of it, it's like then it will be about that you have time. Nothing to do with
Senior Barzel, Senior Barzel are kosher. So this is what I'm
The total complaint is file?
The what? Yeah. No, but I don't know if it's go. Is it going? They're supposed to say publish. I don't like touching it after. I asked, yeah, it's on my. It should be on my computer. I'm starting it again. Start. tonight's share, I wanted to use the opportunity to go over a little bit of a sugya that we learned in the kernel last month, and there was a few quizzes that wanted to clarify, and it's very nigel. It's a very interesting case and sugya. We'll try to bring it out in the time we have as clearly as we can. So the shiloh is if a person have freshly brewed coffee on Shabbos. What could they do? They have their trusty coffee that they have every morning, and they have their coffee machine, and they put the water and the coffee beans, coffee grinds, everything in the machine, set up the machine, put on a timer that it should go off Shabbos morning, and then they'll have the fresh coffee on Shabbos, so that this way they don't have to suffer drinking coffee once a week, and they can have this coffee on Shabbos as well. That's the Shabbos. So I will be, and then if you have a bread machine, you could really theoretically set up. You should put into the machine all the ingredients, and you have fresh challah for Shabbos. Also theoretically similar thing. So I will be mocked in that Moshe Feinstein, the Moshe writes that is Zilzal Shabbos, and Avada, you can't do this. You can't set up that something should be cooked using a timer in such a way to make a malacha happen on Shabbos is a big zilzul to Shabbos, and it's probably included in the Isra of Amir al-Nochri. It's like Amir al-Akum. How could it be worse? You yourself are doing it. Why is it worse than asking a guy to do it? And even though there's sugyas in the first paragraph of Shabbos that discuss setting up malachas happening on Shabbos, this is different, and therefore he says, Avada, you cannot do this. It's a zilzul Shabbos, the design to Shabbos. But what I wanted to discuss, maybe a little more technical, in the sugya itself, so I'm not advising it, based on Ramosha. Let's be mocked in that. However, just to get down into the sugya, to use it as an example.
Ramosha is different than using a timer?
Using a timer.
For ignition or a light?
Yeah, because this is more creating something new. The person will bring out much starker, look at this thing. But some people only bring it like out of this type of thing, like the Minchas Yitzchak says it like out of this. So, but in terms of the sugya itself, leaving that aside, would it be mutar also? So the emphasis is like this: is that there's really four things that we have to discuss in order to really understand the Shabbos. The first one is that you're not allowed to cook on Shabbos. So first we would have to get over the Issa Deraisa Bishul. So is it a problem to set up that you're doing Bishul on Shabbos that we're going to assume is not a problem? It would be like setting a trap before Shabbos, and you're allowed to set up a scenario, leaving Ramosh aside, that it would cook on Shabbos. Okay. But as we all are familiar, there are, besides cooking on Shabbos, when we're not dealing with the actual Issur Deraisa of cooking on Shabbos, there are three Issurim Derabanan that related to this issue. The first issue is that there's an Issur, we'll explain all three, the Nafkaminas, and then where this is fitting. The first one is there's an Issur of Shehiyah. You're not allowed to leave, Midrabanan, you're not allowed to leave uncooked food on an open fire on Shabbos. So if you have an open fire, you just put up the food, and it's not even cooked at all, it's not even a third or a half cooked, and you just want to put the chalent up, you're running late, and you put up the chalent right before Shabbos, and you put it on an open fire. That is Asr al Shehiyah. And the way to address the Isser of Shehiyah is once it's fully cooked, or at least half cooked, then it's mutter, or if you put a blech, according to our minhag, that would be mutter because it's called covering the fire. That's mutter. So that's the first Isser. It's called Shehiyah. You did it before Shabbos, you set it up before Shabbos, and once you have a blech, that's fine. Grufo Ktuma, it's fine. Also, according to many poskim, the Chazon Ish amongst them, I'm saying that because we get that to the Chazon Ish. The Chazon Ish holds, like the sheet is that once it's a third cooked, you don't even need a blech. So if once the chalent is basically edible, so then you could put it on without a blech before Shabbos, then it's fine. Okay. You don't have to cover the knobs, you don't have to cover anything, it's okay. That's the Issur of Shehiyah. There's another Issur of Chazara. Chazara means on Shabbos, the food was on and it's fully cooked, but you're going to take it off to Friday night, you want to take some chalent, and now it's off the fire. So in order to put it back, you also need Grufo Ktuma, even if it's fully cooked. So here's a little more chomer, because here, even if it's fully cooked, you still need a blech, you still need a gufok tuma, you still need to cover the fire, even if it's fully cooked, so you're putting it back on Shabbos. And but once you have gufok tuma, it's okay. However, there's other halachas in order to do chazara, and those are the Tanai Chazar. You need to be holding it the whole time, and you need to have das to put it back. And you can't, obviously it has to be still hot, etc. That's the Isser of Chazar. There's another Isser, which really is the same thing as Chazar if you don't have the Tanai Chazar, which is Nesina L'Chatchila. You're not allowed to take something out of the refrigerator, even if there is a gufok tuma, and there is a blecha, you're not allowed to take something straight out of the refrigerator and put it straight onto a fire on Shabbos, even if the fire is covered. That's the Isser of Nesina L'Chatchila. Basically, as far as that's concerned, there's no way out. Once, if it wasn't on the fire before Shabbos and you want to put a fresh thing on the fire, even if it's covered, you wouldn't be allowed to do it. Okay? Even if it's fully cooked. That's the Isser. And really, the point is, if you took off a pot and you put it on the floor, you put it on the floor, then now you lost, you mevatel the original shia, basically over, and now it's like Nesina L'Chatchila, like you're putting it on again, and that's why you're not allowed to do it, even if there's gufok tuma. Okay. So now, if we think about it, you have this coffee machine, and it's going to start cooking in the middle of Shabbos. Right now, it's off completely. So, there's no Isser D'Oraisa of cooking. So, is it subject to any of these three Isurim, D'Rabbanan, of Shehiyah, Nesina L'Chatchila, or Chazar? Is there a problem with any of these? So, a lot of persons say different things. I want to focus on the Chazon Ish, how the Chazon Ish explains this. This is a very important Chazon Ish. How does he explain this? So Chazon Ish says, first of all, to understand one thing, the Chazon Ish says that the Isser of Shehiyah and the Isser of Chazara is true even if you're not the one that did it. The fact that your pot is on the fire is also. So for example, let's say there's a pot, and I'm not, and someone came in, even if it was a non-Jewish person, a guy comes in, he takes the pot from the chicken soup, it was just taken off the fire, and we put it down on the floor, and oh man, we can't put it back on, let's say, and the guy would go ahead and put it back on the fire. There's no blech, but it's fully cooked, and it's hot soup, and he's not cooking anything. And the guy put it back on the fire. Okay, so I didn't do chazara. I didn't do anything wrong. The guy did it. So great. I didn't even ask him. I come back in. Great. So they put the pot back on the fire. So Chazon Ish says you have to take it off now, because the idea isn't that there's an isser of the chazara of putting it on. The point is that your pot is on the fire now, b'isser. So you have a responsibility. It's your pot, and you have to take it off. The idea is
the same thing.
What?
There was a blackout. The pot got cold, and now.
Okay, so we'll get to that. We'll get that. That'll be enough for me to maybe.
What's the Isser? Is the Isser
The Isser is
on
Chazar.
fire?
Yeah.
But
Because you were Machzir, this pot was not on the pot. It lost its relationship to the fire. It's on the fire for the very first time on Shabbos right now. The Isser, it's Muktzah. The Isser, you have to take it off. It's not the Isser of putting it on. It's Isser of having it on. That's how Chazon Ish learns.
The guy did it for himself. Is also around?
If it's your, I don't know what it means. It's your pot, yeah. So it's not the Maisa Chazar. That's the point. So that's the Chazon Ish. That's the Chazon Ish. It's not the Mir Lakum. It's not the Mir Lakum. It's your Isser. So this is the Chazon Ish's Chiddush, the Gabi Chazar, and the Gabi Shehiyah. It's much more partial like that. Also, let's say I wasn't even home Erev Shabbos, and the guy put on the pot before Shabbos. And it wasn't fully cooked, it wasn't even half cooked, and there's no blech. So, and I walk in Lil Shabbos and I see it there. So I didn't do the shehiyah. No, that's shehiyah. Shehiyah means it's there. It's also, you have to take it off. That's Chazon Ish. Okay, now, so based on that, the Chazon Ish says that if you set up a machine to go on Shabbos, so you put on the pot before Shabbos, and then you put on a timer, and then the timer goes on and the machine goes on Shabbos. So Dr. Chazon Ish, it's awesome, because now it's on. Now, here's the thing, is that the Chazon Ish is also very shver, and a lot of people say different things in the Chazon Ish. And after a long time working on the Chazon Ish, figuring out, I think this is the Mahalach between the Chazon Ish, and this Sefer, Taka brings down, eventually, this is where Chaim Kanievsky brings up the Chazon Ish. Now, other people don't learn differently, but this I'm saying over this Mahalach in the Chazon Ish, I think this is what Chaim Kanievsky's Mahalach in the Chazon Ish. This is like this. It's for sure his Mahalach in the Chazon Ish. That's for sure. So, the Chazon Ish says that which Isser are you over? You put on a food and it's on a timer, which Isser are you really over? So, he says, the halacha that he says is that if the machine that you're putting on, let's say the plata, the hot plate you're putting on, is grufo ktuma, it's a covered flame, then he says, then it's mutter. Then you're allowed to do it. Now, but it has to be grufo ktuma even if it's mavushal kol tzarka, even if it's cooked, but it has to be grufo ktuma. Because in that case, they were mater chazara by grufo ktuma. That's basically his lashon. It means if you would say, that means the Chazon Ish is saying something very interesting. He can't be saying it's an Isser of Shihya. I think Rav Shlomo Zalman says that the Isser would be Shihya. Maybe you would say the Isser is Shihya. The Isser is that just like you're not allowed to put something on an open fire on Shabbos before Shabbos, so that it will come into Shabbos, it will end up being on Shabbos on an open fire. So too, you're not allowed to put it on a fire which is off right now. It's going to become on Shabbos. Also, it's also so Erev Shabbos. You're doing Shehiyah, essentially, just like Shehiyah would be. That's one way to understand the din. Yeah? You're doing Shehiyah. You're putting it on Erev Shabbos, Beiser, because you know that the fire is going to turn on. So since you know that the fire is going to turn on, it's also al Shehiyah. Yeah, that would make sense. You just like you wouldn't be allowed to put it on the fire before Shabbos, so you can't put it on a place that there will be a fire here on Shabbos. It's going to go on even though there's no fire here right now. You could have said like that. That can't be what Chazon Ish is saying, because Chazon Ish holds like Hananya. He paskins that you don't need grufo ktuma by muvashal kol tzarka. And he says even if the food is fully cooked, you have to cover the fire. So he's not saying.
It's not muvashal kol tzarka.
I mean, he says in muvashal kol tzarka. It would be even if it would be muvashal kol tzarka, you would still need it to be grufo ktuma. So he holds that once muvashal kol tzarka, she is mutter before Shabbos. So if the whole issue is because you put it on before Shabbos, it shouldn't have to be covered. It should be mutter even if it wasn't covered.
Is there any problem here heating the hot water or crushing the bean?
No, well, it's heating the water and then cooking the beans, both. It's to be sure.
It's both.
Yeah, it's to be sure.
So when you have the hot water existence already,
Doesn't make a difference. Without me this, right? So that's what Shlomo Zalman says. But so you would say maybe it's called Nesina L'Chatchila. Maybe it's like you're putting it on for the first time on Shabbos. It was off the flame. Now and then you went ahead and made the flame go. What would be the difference of putting the food on the flame or putting the flame under the food? So it's like you put it on Nesina L'Chatchila on Shabbos. You went ahead and took the food and put it on the flame. Just like you wouldn't be allowed on Shabbos to take the food and put it on the flame. You're not allowed to leave the food there and bring the flame to the food. So it would be an Isser of Nesina L'Chatchila on Shabbos. And you didn't put it there, but it's there. That's the Chazon Ish. Since it's there, it's awesome. But the problem, it can't be that either, because the Chazon Ish says it's mutter if there's a blech. If the hot plate has a grufo ktuma, it's mutter. So you can't be saying it's Nesina L'Chatchila. So what's the Chazon Ish saying? He's saying it's also at chazar. It's like you're putting it back on Shabbos. Grufo ktuma, you're allowed to put it back on Shabbos. The problem is that's the only thing that doesn't make sense. I would understand if it's shehiyah, I would understand if it's Nesina L'Chatchila. Only chazar. Chazar means is that the thing was on a flame on Shabbos, you took it off to take a little bit, and you put it back. Grufo ktuma, it's mutter. But this thing was never on the flame to begin with on Shabbos. So what does that mean? Well, why is it called grufo? Why is this called chazar? Chazon Ish before it's called chazar. So without getting, it's a little to bring the riot to it from the Magen Avraham. There's a stand Magen Avraham, but it seems pretty clear from the Chazon Ish that what's going on over here is that since the whole idea of Chazara is that on Shabbos this thing was already shaykh to the fire. It was already shaykh, so it was on the fire already. And then I took it off for a little bit and I put it back. As long as it's covered, it's mutter. Obviously, as long as it's covered, it's mutter. So says the Chazon Ish over here, the fact that this thing was on a kira. It was on some sort of heating mechanism. Even though the heating mechanism was off, that's enough of a shaykhis to this heat that if it ends up turning on Shabbos, it's just like I'm being machzer. I'm not being mechadish anything new. I'm not doing anything new. I'm not bringing it to a new oven. It was on the oven already. The oven was off. So the oven was off. So now when it goes back on, it's like I'm bringing it back to the heat. So it's like chazara, but it's not nesina. It's not a brand new thing. And therefore having it on this plata, even while it's off, is like as if it was on this thing going into Shabbos. It was already on the plata. It was already on the hot plate going into Shabbos. And Memela, it's just like in the middle of Shabbos. It's just like you took it off because there's no heat. When you put it back on, as long as it's a blech, it's mutter.
So you wouldn't be able to put the coffee in on Shabbos.
Yeah, so this is all if you set everything up from before. So l'chayra, according to Chazon Ish, as long as it was grufo ketuma, it would be mutter because you're allowed to do chazara, grufo ketuma.
Even if it's not
for Shabbos.
cooked?
What?
Why is it gar from something cold became a chazar? It itself is not a revision.
Because if it lost its shaykhs to the flame.
Yeah, it's not cooked. It's completely mufked from having a muslim and bishop by it. The Chazon Ish talking about bishop of Tzarki, right?
What?
The Chazon Ish talking about bishop of Tzarki, or it's not the bishop?
I mean, talking about that. Talking about mine. But so the thing is like this. The thing is that
The do chazara doesn't be fully cooked.
yeah, because you'll be cooking things.
Right.
But you're not cooking.
Why?
You're going to bishul. You set it up before.
So it's the setting it before they
I'll say after chazara, after the being there, it's not shehir. After putting it back, it was there from before Shabbos. After cooking, there's no cooking. Now the only thing you could ask is that there's no that there's no grufo ketuma, because grufo ketuma means I'm not going to turn it on. Here, grufo turned it on even though it's grufo ketuma. So you could say maybe there's no grufo ketuma. Then fine.
Why can't you cover it over? Set it up and cover everything over.
No, say because the whole idea of covering it over is that it's so covered that I don't care about the heat, and I'm not gonna make it go on. But you figure out a way to make it go on, even though it's
You
covered.
have a hecker not to come to it.
So it's a funny group of two. I cover everything and then I plug it in and set up
You
the
have a
machine.
hecker not to come to
Same thing as with bishul. You're not doing the bishul either.
I saw someone else. Okay, but this is now. The mice it comes out that so according to what we're saying is that alone that the pot is on a hot plate or on a mechanism that can cook, even though it didn't cook yet, it was off, is still considered that it was on for Shabbos. And memela, if memela putting it back is just like chazar. So there's a lot of other nafkaminas of this idea. Okay. So one important nafkamina is what you mentioned is what happens if you're on a hot plate or on a crock pot and the fire goes out and then it comes back on Shabbos. Right? The power went off. So if the power went off, so it would come out according to this svara is like this: is that we paskin that if you take something off the fire on Shabbos, okay, and you were still you ended up you weren't holding it, but you didn't put it on the ground either. You put it on a soft, so you put it in between state. It's not the ground. It's like a soft sort. He's saying you put it like in an in between state. You didn't manage to put it on the floor. So you weren't. The halacha is that it's only us if you have das to not put it back on. If you didn't have das to leave it off, you'll be allowed to put it back on. The only time that's usher without das is if it wants to hit the floor. So come out that this thing when the power went off is not called the karka. It's not called it's off the flame because a flame which is off is still shayach to the fire. So since a flame which is off is still shayach to the fire, so memela this that goes back on, so it's like chazar. It's grufo ketuma. It's mutter. So as long as it's grufo ketuma, it will be mutter. That would be the halacha in that case. That would be considered a covered fire, and even though it went off, you never took it off. It's still shayach to the fire. When it goes back on, it'll be chazara, which is mutter with its grufo ketuma. What?
The worst because no electricity shayach until it out. There's no fire b'chal.
This is the place that's. And the idea is that this is the place that when it goes on, it's mesiachas to this. That's a related mitzvah. The only thing is you would have to know is that Chaim Kanievsky says this whole svar of Chazon Ish, that putting it on here is considered on the fire enough that it's a continuation only works for this hot plate. And it's like as if when you put it on this hot plate, when the fire goes on, it's like it was on the whole time. But the halacha is, if you have something on a real blech, you could take it off there and move it to another thing. So here you have this hot. I'll put it on a turned off blech, turned off hot plate. Oh, and according to this long distance, it's like I'm on the fire. And then I'll take it off there and put it on another one, on a real one, later. So that Chaim Kanievsky says that the Chazon Ish wouldn't be mad to that, because it's only enough to say that whatever fire ends up going on is like it was on from original. But you're not going to say that because of that, then it's on, like I'm on the fire automatically. I don't have all the points of being on the fire. This is the Chazon Ish's the Chazon Ish's mahalach that he says that putting on something on a hot plate to go on Shabbos, he calls it chazara. This is the pshat what he's saying because you're related to it, you're connected to it, and therefore since even though it was off, it's still considered that whatever happens later is continuation of the original, and therefore he would say it's mutter. But again, like we start off with the Moshe, the Ma'aseh, it's also to do it off the Bishul, and it's no Shabbos.